Welcome to the Imago Leadership Podcast, where we explore the habits, stories, and spiritual practices that form wise, emotionally mature, mission-shaping leaders.
Welcome to the podcast. Today we're beginning a new series called The Language of Leadership, and today's episode will lay the foundation of what could probably be a 6-month series. So we're going to talk about why our current leadership paradigms are failing us and why so many leaders feel disillusioned and discouraged, and how Jesus Beatitudes offer a radically different way to lead, one that's grounded not in expertise or power, but in love, belonging, and sacred vocation. So let's step into this together. When someone says leadership, most of us probably picture the usual suspects: power, authority, confidence, charisma, and influence. And those words aren't wrong, but they've picked up some dents and scratches over the years. We've all seen what happens when power gets twisted or when charisma becomes a tool for manipulation. And what about influence? Sure, it matters. In fact, you've probably heard the accepted wisdom that leadership is influence. But some of the most influential leadership lessons that I've learned have come from bad examples of it. Sure, those leaders influenced me, but would I call their example leadership? Probably not. So maybe leadership is more than the categories we've inherited. Maybe we need a fresh starting point. A lot of our modern leadership thinking comes from the Enlightenment, the era that told us that the only things worth trusting are the things we can measure. It was a paradigm shifting epic in human history and recreated the whole world of what we know and why we know it. What is legitimate knowledge? That mindset elevated the expert, the person who supposedly knows everything there is to know about a particular subject, and it turned leadership into a kind of a technical performance. But humans aren't machines. Communication scholars remind us that even a simple conversation is layered with assumptions and emotions and histories and hopes. Therefore, the Enlightenment mantra, "I think, therefore I am," made famous by Rene Descartes, who I think you are and who you think I am, that's just the beginning of this whole dynamic of human relationships and conversations and communication. Yet we build leadership models that pretend people are predictable inputs and outputs, and that we live and work in a world of predictable inputs and outputs. No wonder so many leaders feel disconnected from their teams. And so many teams feel unseen by the leaders. There's this assumption that we should just know what the right answer is. We should just do it, what we're told. Don't let all of the other unseen intangibles get in the way of that. And so we get frustrated when things don't work as clockwork the way we think they should. I think many of us feel a quiet ache, a sense that something about the way we lead and work isn't right. It's not a bitterness. It's more like a longing, a desire to be human again, a desire for our workplaces to recapture the spirit of our humanity, to be known, to contribute something meaningful. Even in for-profit spaces where the bottom line is the mission, we still want to go to places that enhance our humanity, our desire for meaning. And that longing is holy. It's a sign that God is stirring something new. If every person carries a divine vocation, a calling that comes from outside of themselves, then leadership can't be about control. It has to make room for that calling to breathe. It has to honor the sacredness of the people entrusted to us. Leadership becomes less about managing outcomes and more about cultivating people. Here's a shift that may surprise some of you. Leadership is, at its core, a language. Leadership scholars point out that leaders use symbols, words, stories, gestures to create reality and to help the team grasp reality together. Even something as simple as labeling someone motivated or lazy can change how they behave, and it changes the way other people see them. That's how powerful language is. Leaders also help people make sense of the past, understand the present, and imagine the future. They frame meaning. They tell stories that help communities see who they are and where they're going. So leadership isn't just about what we do, it's about the world we create together with our words, with our exchanges, with our interactions with each other. Let me borrow a scene from the movie The Matrix. In the movie, the main character, Neo, senses that something is off about his world. And then Morpheus comes along and offers him a choice: the blue pill, which lets him return to the comfortable illusion, or the red pill, which wakes him up to a much harder but truer reality. Jesus does something similar in the Sermon on the Mountain. He invites people to wake up, to see the world as God sees it, not as the culture around them insists it must be. Humanity swallowed the serpent's promise of instant wisdom. The world unraveled because we choose our own way of knowing rather than trusting God's wisdom. But Jesus steps into that unraveling and begins forming a new community, one shaped not by power, but by blessing, one shaped by his word. Before Jesus ever speaks a word of the Beatitudes, he's healing people. People who have been pushed to the margins, people who have been unformed by suffering and exclusion. And they come from everywhere, different regions, different ethnic groups, different histories. You can find that at the end of chapter 4 in the Gospel of Matthew. This is the prelude to the Sermon on the Mount. Then, the beginning in chapter 5, Jesus gathers them, all of these people who he's healed and made whole from all over the area, who represent all kinds of ethnicities and cultures. He gathers them and he makes them whole. He forms them into a new community, and then he begins to teach them. He goes up on the hillside, sits down, and begins to teach them. He begins to give them a new word of new creation. And his first words aren't commands, they're blessings. Let me read this to you. I'm going to read the full text of the Beatitudes from Matthew 5. Let me start. When he saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to them. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to them. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil things about you falsely on account of me. Rejoice and be glad, because your reward is great in heaven, for they persecuted the prophets before you in the same way." This is the Beatitudes. He begins his word, his new constitution for this new people that he's formed, in blessing. But it's not the kind of blessing that we would expect. It's a blessing that tells the truth about God's kingdom. He's blessing all the wrong kinds of people, the people that this world would say are not blessed. But he's saying you are blessed if you act in these ways because they represent the kingdom of God. This is the language of belonging. It's the language that restores dignity and recreates people from the inside out. Modern leadership research actually backs this up. Scholars who study emotional intelligence talk about 5 levels of emotional communication, from what's happening inside a leader to how they relate to individuals to the emotional tone of entire teams and organizations. And at every level, emotions matter. Great leaders aren't the ones who shut their feelings down. They're the ones who can name what they're experiencing and what others are experiencing, and pay attention to what others are feeling and understand how those emotions are shaping our decisions. How are those emotions shaping the way we look at the reality that we were leading in? They know irritation can escalate anger. They know surprise rarely comes alone. It usually brings joy or disappointment or fear. They know moods influence creativity, problem solving, and risk taking. They know how to steward emotions, not to suppress them, but to guide them toward what's good, to guide them toward the flourishing of our team and our mission. And that sounds a lot like the Beatitudes, doesn't it? Humility, mercy, peacemaking, purity of heart. These are both spiritual virtues as well as emotional competencies. They require leaders to develop an emotional intelligence. Another thing leadership scholars point out is that leaders are storytellers, not in a manipulative way, but in a meaning making way. Stories help people understand who they are. They help teams see what matters. They spark action. They transmit values. They help communities imagine a future worth moving toward. And Jesus does this constantly. The Beatitudes are a story about the kind of world God is creating and the kind of people we're becoming. When leaders tell stories that honor people's dignity, invite them into God's mission, something powerful happens. People come alive. There's a kind of leadership that clings to control, that treats people or treats knowledge as power, that measures everything and values very little. It looks impressive on the outside, but it leaves a trail of exhaustion behind us. And I believe all of us are familiar with it. All of us have experienced in one way or another. And then there's the leadership Jesus models, a leadership shaped by grace, patience, humility, and love. A leadership that takes the long view, a leadership that believes people are worth the time it takes to form them. One is the blue pill, the other is the red pill. And every day as leaders, I believe we have to choose which pill we're going to take. The ways of this world, the leadership of this world, or the leadership that Jesus is inviting us into. As we move a little further into this conversation about leadership, I want to slow the pace and sit with an idea we touched on earlier. The idea that leadership is a kind of language. If that's true, then becoming a different kind of leader isn't just about changing our strategies or adopting new habits. It's about learning to speak in a new way, almost like learning a new dialect of the soul. And as anyone who has tried to learn a new language knows, it takes time. At first, everything feels awkward. You translate it in your head, you fumble for the right words, you worry about sounding foolish, but eventually something shifts. You stop translating and start thinking in that language. It becomes a part of you. I'm currently in the process of studying French. And honestly, the hardest part about learning French is the fear of looking like a fool. But you keep doing it and you keep taking risks, just like relationships. Leadership works the same way. Most of us were trained to speak the language of efficiency and certainty. We were taught to communicate in metrics and outcomes. We learned to keep our emotions tucked away and our spiritual lives separate from our work. We learned to treat people as resources rather than image bearers. So when we try to speak the language of belonging, when we try to bless instead of command, invite instead of pressure, listen instead of rush, it can feel clumsy at first. But that clumsiness isn't a sign that we're failing, it's a sign that we're being formed, and formation always takes time. There's also this honest reality that every leader carries, the gap between who we want to be and who we actually are on any given day. We want to be patient, but we're tired. We want to be present, but our minds are scattered. We want to be merciful, but we're carrying our own wounds. We want to be peacemakers, but conflict drains us and it's never ending. That gap doesn't disqualify us. It simply reminds us that we're human. The Beatitudes don't assume we've already arrived. They assume we're on the journey. They assume we're learning a new way of being, slowly, imperfectly, but sincerely. And if you feel like you're not there yet, that's okay. None of us are, but we're on the way. I want to talk a little bit more about emotions because this is an area where many leaders feel unsure. Some of us grew up in environments where emotions were treated as weaknesses. Others were told to be professional, which often meant be numb. Sometimes we were told to keep the emotion out of it. And some of us simply never had models of emotionally healthy leadership. But emotions aren't the enemy of leadership, they're the engine of it. One leadership scholar describes emotions as the music beneath the words. You can say all the right things, but if the emotional tone is off, if your presence communicates anxiety or frustrations, if you are an anxious presence with the people around you, people will hear the music, not the lyrics. And emotions spread, they're contagious. If a leader walks into a room anxious, the room becomes anxious. If a leader walks in hopeful, the room lifts. If a leader walks in curious, the room opens. You can feel that when leaders walk into the room. If a leader walks in defensive, the room closes. Emotional intelligence isn't about being sentimental. It's really about being aware of the emotional climate we're creating and being aware of the emotions of other people around us, because those emotions will have an effect on the kind of conversations and discussions that we have that move the mission forward. One of the simplest ways to shift that climate is to practice the pause. Before you respond, before you correct or jump in with a solution, pause, take a breath, notice what's happening inside you, notice what's happening in the room, notice what God may be doing beneath the surface. I think it's always a good practice to assume that God is already here. This disruption isn't a surprise to him. He's at work, and our job is to find where he's at work and join in. So that pause is not empty space, it's sacred space. It's the space where wisdom rises and where the Spirit has room to speak. And presence, simple, grounded presence, is one of the greatest gifts a leader can offer. People don't need us to have all the answers, they need us to be present enough to hear the real question. I also want to return to storytelling because this is one of the most overlooked leadership tools we have. Every team, every organization, every family is shaped by the stories it tells about itself. Some communities tell stories of scarcity, we never have enough. Others tell stories of fear, don't make mistakes. And others tell stories of competition, only the strongest rise. But kingdom leadership tells a different story, a story of abundance, grace, belonging, shared vocation, and God's presence in the ordinary. When leaders tell stories that honor people's dignity and name God's activity, those stories begin to reshape the culture. And culture is simply the story a community tells over and over until it becomes true of them. They live it as their reality. Blessing is one of the most countercultural leadership practices we have. It's not flattery or vague encouragement, but it's naming the truth of who someone is in God's eyes. Blessing says, I see the image of God in you. I see your courage. I see your hunger for justice. I see the mercy you carry. You are made in the divine image, and you are a person of inherent dignity and worth. That simple phrase, that simple truism should be the basis for everything we do as a team and organization. It should guide or even our policies. Blessing doesn't ignore brokenness. It simply refuses to let brokenness have the final word. And when leaders bless, people rise into their calling. They rise into their courage. They rise into their identity and their mission. Blessing is formation. Blessing is leadership. And blessing is love in language form. One of the hardest parts of leading like Jesus is that the results aren't always immediate. Blue pill leadership promises quick wins. Red pill leadership, kingdom leadership, takes the long view. It's slow, it's relational, it's patient, it's rooted in trust. But slow leadership is not weak leadership. It's wise leadership. It's the kind of leadership that builds people and not just your programs. It forms character, not just the competencies, and it creates legacy beyond just the outcomes you have. Legacy is what the Beatitudes are all about. They're not a checklist or they are a way of being, a way of living and of leading, of loving in this world. So as you continue reflecting on this episode, I want to leave you with a simple question, not a challenge or a task, but just a question to sit with. What language do you want your leadership to speak? What do you want your leadership to speak? Not the language you think you should speak, not the language your organization expects you to speak, not the language you've inherited, but the language your soul longs to speak. The language of the kingdom that reflects belonging, reflects your humanness. Leadership that blesses and heals and forms not only yourself, but others around you. Because that language is already inside you. God has put it in you. God has put his divine character, nature in you. So it's the language God has been speaking over you since the beginning. And leadership is simply learning to echo it. Kingdom leadership sounds like this. Come join us. I'm listening. Your voice matters. Let's figure this out together. You belong. It's the kind of communication that creates space rather than closing it. It invites rather than coerces. It builds community rather than extracting productivity from people, dehumanizing them. This is the language that helps people flourish. This is the language that shapes mission, and it's the language that reflects the heart of God. Our communication is meant to build community. So here's the invitation. Are you willing to wake up to a different way of leading? Are you willing to let go of the illusion that leadership is about control? Are you willing to speak blessing into people's lives around you? The world has enough experts. What it needs is people who lead with love, people who create belonging, people who help others discover their God-given vocation. So as you step into your week and into the month ahead, may you hear the voice that calls you by your name, who has a sacred vocation for you, a leadership of love. May you speak words that give life. May you lead with courage, tenderness, and imagination. May you discover in the language you use the kingdom that is already breaking in. Thanks for being here. Next time we'll take a closer look at the first Beatitude and what it means for the way that we lead.
Thanks for joining us on this journey of becoming wiser, more courageous, and more deeply formed leaders. Until next time, may your work reflect the kind of communal wisdom and hope that strengthens teams and sustains mission.